Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we are going to explore the topic of coping with tragedy. It's unusual in the New Thinking Aloud series that we ever refer to contemporary events because our focus is on timeless realities. But I have to say that this interview is being recorded within 48 hours of the largest mass shooting ever to take place in the United States. And it occurred here in Las Vegas, the city where this recording is being made. My guest today is Dr. Pierre Grimes, a philosopher and founder of the American Philosophical Practitioners Association and also a founder of the Noetic Society. He is the author of several books, including Philosophical Midwifery, Unblocking, and a new book about to come out, a dialogue between Jesus and Socrates, the dialogue made in heaven. Welcome, Pierre.
Thank you.
You know, I didn't mention to our viewers, but I'd like to mention now that you are a decorated World War II veteran.
Yes.
And I think that's significant because you have witnessed firsthand horrors well beyond anything that I think I've even read about in my lifetime.
Well, yes, indeed.
That's a positive thing in a way because I know scholars have said that civilization is becoming less violent than it was back then.
I differ. I think we're on a road that is no different than the past.
I see.
That tragedy is the... someone said it well. They said, history is nothing other than pages of blood, one after the other. Tragedies unfold continuously because we haven't come to the roots of what is tragedy and why does tragedy become the very fabric of our lives, collectively and individually.
Well, you're a specialist in Greek philosophy, and it was the ancient Greeks who invented tragedy as an art form.
Yes, and curiously enough, they made tragedy their continuous concern, since wherever they went when they conquered throughout the known world in that day, all the way to India, establishing 11 Alexandrias. Wherever they went, they created gymnasiums and an auditorium to play tragedies.
And comedies.
And yes, between every second and third part of the trilogy, they stuck in a comedy.
And in fact, I get the impression that the purpose of the comedies was to help people digest the tragedy.
Oh, right, yes. Yes, a comic episode. We don't include them in our tragedies. We don't see the relationship between comedy and tragedy.
How do you view that relationship?
Well, they both require understanding. Tragedy, see, from the Greek viewpoint, is a natural consequence of experience injustice. The consequence of experiencing injustice personally is anger. We are all angry because we all have suffered in our youth episodes of injustice when our parents and other ones who are in our family seize upon moments when we are free and open and use that occasion to impose their own personal views which inhibit that freedom. That's experienced as injustice. Therefore, we're all angry. Tragedy is nothing other than acting out that anger. Now, the shooter in this terrible tragedy, we have to discover what were the roots of his anger. We have to understand him.
At this moment in time,
Yes.
it's a mystery.
Yes, no, that's right. It's going to take time to discover the roots of his anger.
Mm-hmm.
The newspapers today, they wonder why he doesn't fit into this category or that category or this category. That's good. Now let's get to the real category. What caused him to be so angry that he took lives of so many people and acted out that tragedy? That's the mystery. And it can be opened up.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how can we do it? I suspect that computer he had might be the secret.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I do know that the law enforcement officials are endeavoring as best they can to get to the bottom of it. But whether they will or not, I don't know. I know that you have a lot of faith that the universe is intelligible.
Yes.
I suppose I'm not sure about that. I am not sure about that. It may, for all I know, it will remain a mystery for a long time. There are many mysteries.
Well, I would say that my work with people and exploring human problems, you see, my book, Philosophical Midwifery, is titled A New Paradigm for Understanding Human Problems.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially, the origin of all human problems is having a false image, an unsuspected false image of the self.
Yes.
Where did that image come from? The false image of oneself came from when we were subject to injustices in our youth. We then can't understand why it took place. We have a difficulty blaming parents and surrogate parents, so we blame ourselves and create a false image.
Mm-hmm.
But with that, along with it, comes anger for having experienced the injustice. And so injustice is part of our lives, and so is anger.
Mm-hmm.
Not anxiety. Psychology goes for anxiety. I say, no, anger.
Anger.
Anger is the key.
Anger because we've been treated unjustly,
Yes.
maybe even before we even remember.
We bury it.
Uh-huh.
You're quite right. We bury it.
I mean, my understanding as a psychologist is that early childhood trauma typically takes place before the age of 5 or 6.
Yes, quite true. There's a whole class of problems that occur between, as soon as it's very often early experiences can be recalled and reconstructed.
Mm-hmm.
And when they are, they follow the same dynamic. Powerful they are, very important. Let me give you an example. I work with a woman, a very interesting woman, translator, well-educated. She couldn't understand why it is that every time she got involved in something, some work, when she began to see its profundity, she closed the book. She stopped.
Mm-hmm.
She couldn't go any further. She made up all kinds of excuses why she didn't go further. So we had a talk, and she said, you know what? I see where this is coming from. She said, you know, when I was no more than 3 years old, she said, I was playing in the backyard. We really moved into a new area. It was barren, somewhat barren, but I found a frog, and I held the frog in my hand, and it was my friend, she said. Mm-hmm. And my mother came out and said, what are you doing with that stupid, ugly thing? And she threw it on the ground and squashed it.
Ooh.
I said, that's very significant, you know. And she's crying. Mm-hmm. I said, why do you think there's a relationship between this past event and your present difficulty? She said, you know, I think I see what's going on. Whenever I get close to something beautiful, I panic. It's as if I'm reliving that event, mm-hmm. and I can't give it up. I'm so angry. After she saw that, she could then go back to her work and do what she was doing that was beautiful and accomplished it.
Mm-hmm. Well, what you're suggesting is, if I get your gist, that through a process of self-discovery, self-exploration, we are able to uncover our own unconscious motives. And
yes, indeed.
I mean, and I assume, as it relates to the question of coping with tragedy, if this could happen in throughout society, maybe we would become less violent. But you started the interview by saying that tragedy will always be with us, as if it were, there's nothing we can do to avoid it.
Well, that's because there is no parent that can ever be free of a problem. What is a problem? A problem, we can call it, what are the grounds of a problem? Isn't it curious that I think we can all recall when we were free, open, experiencing something, absorbed in it, at those moments, that's when the parent seizes upon it and is worried that if they were to endure that and continue that spirit, they would be too free. They would be moving in unknown directions and violate local customs and their own family traditions. And so they close down.
And most parents assume that's their job.
That's their job. They're going to make them social.
Yeah.
We're going to make them Christians. We're going to make them good people.
Yep.
Because it's unpredictable. They can't stand the unpredictable.
Well, you seem to be suggesting, if I get you, that civilization itself is the cause of tragedy.
Yes, indeed. We are the causes of it. See, the most interesting thing, the first great work in history that took a form of a literary and philosophical and psychological form is Homer's Iliad.
Yes.
What is it that Achilles did? See, he suffered a great tragedy. His great friend, Patroclus, he was killed because of Achilles' stupidity of urging him to go into combat and wearing his uniform.
Against Hector.
Yes.
I know the scene.
Yes.
Hector is challenging Achilles to a man one-on-one combat, and Achilles doesn't really want to fight, so his cousin and apparently lover, Patroclus, puts on Achilles' armor, goes to fight Hector, and is killed.
Right. And that is the moment Achilles now has to examine why he did what he did. And he discloses all of the dynamics which later I saw as the fundamental principles that bring about a problem, an unsuspected problem. The key point, therefore, in the Iliad is the episode where Lord Phoenix discloses his relationships with him, with Achilles, and he was in fact his surrogate father and mother.
Yes.
And he raised him. And as you look at the dynamics of Phoenix's own background, it's the same that he then brought about to Achilles, and therefore it's acting out an early pattern once again. All problems have long histories. They go back to the cave. Every problem is a result of a parent having experienced that very same episode in their life, and they're acting it out once again.
And you find that in Homer.
Yes.
Now, I've got to pursue this a little more with you, because my understanding of Homer is a little different. And I think most people would say something like, well, maybe not. You're really the expert in classical culture. I am not. But what I have come to understand is that Homer's worldview was one in which people had very little choice in their life, that we were the victims of fate, the victims of the gods, and that it was only in the rise of Greek philosophy after Homer that the idea of being responsible for oneself and developing one's own character came into being. Am I wrong about that?
It's exactly the opposite, because Achilles is a victim. Until he began to examine the roots of his own foolishness that brought about the tragedy of his great friend, he then becomes free of it and becomes one of the greatest heroes. And in fact, he experiences what we would call an enlightenment experiences at the Mount, very similar to chapter 9 in the New Testament, the Gospel of Mark, the divine illumination experience. Achilles had that at the Mount.
So what you're saying is that the wisdom that we find embodied in Greek philosophy is there in Homer as well.
That's right. That's right. When I worked out the dynamics of philosophical midwifery, and I went back to read Homer, and I was shocked to see, good heavens, what's remarkable about this work is he did it to himself. He didn't have someone leading him step by step through a process of questioning. He did it with himself. He demanded from himself reasons, and he then began unpacking all of the factors that led him to that event.
But wouldn't you say that, and this is a very important episode, I don't mean to diminish it, but wouldn't you say that in general, when one reads Homer, there's this sense that humans are sort of susceptible to the whims of the gods?
But you see, that is not the case with Achilles, because he no longer turns to his god. His mother was a pseudo-god, right? Themis. And he says, no more. And he works out his own destiny. That's the break. And that was the cause, therefore, of tragedies. He turned the tragedy into seeing and a moment for growth. Every tragedy has the very elements of our own spiritual growth, and that's why they're important to unpack. Not just because we want to release some kind of energy. We want to recover ourselves. The idea of the self, therefore, in Greek literature is paramount.
Well, would you say that Achilles is different than the other figures who appear in Homer?
Well, you know, he is the exception, and that's why it's great, and that's why it's an object of study. Take another aspect of it. In the 9th book of Homer, in his Odyssey, the Phaeacians say to Odysseus, the Trojan War was designed by Zeus to benefit the education of man. Therefore, the war that Achilles is, it becomes the schoolhouse. It becomes the particular koan to work on for your own destiny.
I've heard people say much the same about the Second World War.
Well, I have a different view of the Second World War.
You were part of
it. If you don't mind, I was once on a night patrol, and we had a little difficulty, and therefore I couldn't go back the same way I went out, and that was a rule. You have to come back the same way you left. And so I worked my way back up to my unit, and another adjacent unit, of course, I came into contact with, and a rifleman came up to me and he said, I want to look at you. He said, I watched you for the last 5 minutes and I had you in my sight. You were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and there was a fight just a short while ago. He said, I could have killed you. I want to know why I didn't pull my trigger. I said, thanks. Thank you very much. Following that, the next patrol I went on, which was really remarkable, we're going along and my colleague is going, I'm going, shut up. So later I said, what did you see? He said, we were walking on Highway 6, we were walking on the Roman road that the Romans built to pursue the Huns. And I said, oh my God, we're doing the same thing?
You were involved in the liberation of Rome.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So there I am, walking on the same road that the Romans built to fight the Huns, and here we are fighting the Huns once again. I said, Europe is sick. This is tragedy. I'm reliving. This is another episode that's ongoing. They're always at war with one another.
Well, people say history is doomed to repeat itself until we learn the lessons.
Yeah. Yeah. It's called, How Do We Choose Our Leader?
Mm-hmm. Well,
yes, how do we choose our leader?
That's part of it, but it certainly, if you're referring to the recent election in the U.S., you have to say it's not just the problem of one person. It's a problem of the masses.
You know what? I think he woke up their anger.
Mm-hmm.
This is an election where the leaders woke up anger, and that's why we're all on edge and waiting to fight one another. He woke up anger, and therefore it's going to be a tragedy. We're going to spill out. This age is going to be really a multitude of tragedies because our leader ennobles it and makes it part of himself, and he justifies it and explores it himself and personifies it himself.
Mm-hmm. But he couldn't do that if it wasn't implicitly there in the human psyche.
Oh, yes. Because there are many injustices in society. We suffer injustices.
I recall reading an essay by Carl Jung, this
Yes.
great Swiss psychiatrist. I think he wrote it in about 1933, prior to the Second World War, in which he said he noticed in the dreams of his psychotherapy clients the rising images of Wotan, the German god of war. And he said, based on the dreams of his patients, he foresaw a war.
Yes. At the end of World War II, there was a film house in my neighborhood, and during one summer, every night they had a new movie, European movie, and they were all pre-World War II films, and you could see the same thing in all of those films.
Well, maybe we're going through something comparable yet again.
Ah, yes. And it's going to play itself out, but you see, it gives us an opportunity, and the opportunity is forcing us to see. Well, why are Americans? Why do we want to believe we can live independent of tragedies? We want a home, we want a fireplace, we want kids to get well educated. We don't want tragedies, yet we're in the middle of it, and we're subject to them.
Yeah. That's the crux of the issue, isn't it?
Yes, that's the crux of the illusion. Underneath it is their own tragedy because they're not coming to grips with their own false image of themselves.
Well, every human is going to die. And I suppose for each and every person, that's a potential tragedy. Right there is no avoiding it.
No.
And my understanding of the meaning of at least Renaissance tragedy, I don't know much about the classical tragedies, but the idea seems to be that even in the face of inevitable doom, people can discover something noble, something great within themselves.
That's right. That's right. Yes, my work shows that man wants to be noble. He wants to be free of his own illusions. He wants to live a meaningful life, but he doesn't know how to do it. What we have to do, you see, is take this kind of learning and make it an object of study. The study of dreams, and daydreams, by the way, are equally valid tools for coming to grips with the nature of oneself.
Yeah.
What would happen to our education if we made those two things paramount in education?
I'd be in favor of it.
Right. But you see, if we need to show them the way to understand it, why not introduce it in the 4th grade on? Let us look at each child's dreams. Let's take Johnny and Mary's dream and make it a subject for discussion in the class. It'll make their reflection, it'll make the possibility of understanding oneself real, vital.
Well, I'm surprised to hear you say this, Pierre, because you are a professional philosopher, and for the most part, the philosophers I know love to talk about You know, the relationship between rational ideas and dreams seem to be the epitome of the irrational.
I have been analyzing dreams for many, many years. I've never found a dream that was not profound. I never found a daydream that wasn't profound.
Oh.
The same way of understanding your problem you can apply to dreams.
Mm-hmm.
If that is done, then they become rational. Then you can see behind the rationality and intelligibility, and that's the road to man's freedom.
What you're saying kind of reminds me a bit of Walt Whitman's title of his famous book of poetry, Blades of Grass, Leaves of Grass, that even in a grain of sand or a leaf of grass, there's incredible profundity.
To see the world in a blade of grass and heaven in a wild flower, and to hold infinity on the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour.
Yeah.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Is that William Blake?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And we don't do that normally. Maybe tragedy sometimes pushes us there.
Tragedy is our education. See, the real interesting thing is why are we angry? Why doesn't it follow if you have a false idea of the self, so what? Why are we angry? Where does anger come from? Why should we be angry simply because we have a false idea of the self?
Well,
we must have an idea, we must have a self that doesn't want to be called something other than what it is.
Yeah. Well, we also have, I think, biologically, a certain amount of aggressiveness in our genetic makeup. I mean, we're closely related to chimpanzees, and they are one of the few species that will, in effect, make war against each other.
That's true. But I think we're also akin to the heavens. And there is also our home.
Well, Pierre Grimes, what a wonderful note to end this conversation on, and what a pleasure to be with you. This has been wonderful.
My pleasure.
Thank you for being with me.
Thank you.
And thank you for being with us.